My guest today, Lucinda Hartley, is named as one of Australia's 100 Women of Influence by the Australian Financial Review and had gained recognition as one of the Melbourne's top 100 most influential people in the Age newspaper. Lucinda is an urban designer and serial entrepreneur and is focused on pioneering innovative methods for improving cities. As a co-founder of Co-Design Studio, she spearheaded new community-led approaches for neighborhood building based on human-centered design. And as a co-founder of Neighborlytics, she uses her social innovation and entrepreneurship strengths to harness big data in the tech world. In this episode, we talked about the importance of neighborhoods in influencing the opportunities and quality of life, the human side of cities. Lucinda shared her initiative named Porch Placemaking and how the experience went last year in 2020 as well. Also, she shared her passion and love for technology and how have it helped her in placemaking and urban design in cities. Assalamu alaikum and hello everyone. I am Azban Sari, the founder of the organization Peacemakers Pakistani, and I am bringing you the stories of placemakers, artists, and professionals from around the globe about how they created an impact and made change happen. You are listening to the Making It Happen show. Thank you for joining in. Enjoy the episode. Shall we start with the questions?
Yeah, sure.
Already?
Yeah, let's do it. I'm excited to talk to you.
Okay, great. Okay, so Lucinda, tell me about your passion for public spaces and how did you just become a placemaker?
Yeah, thank you very much, Asbar. And it's really great to chat from across the world and from home. So I've been working in placemaking on and off for about a decade, and my background is in urban design. And I think my passion for neighborhoods and placemaking actually began from my childhood. I lived in many different cities growing up in Nairobi, in Harare, in Johannesburg, and Bern, and London, and many other cities in Australia. And that experience, I think, showed me the diversity of the way that people live around the world, and that your neighborhood has a very big influence on your quality of life and your opportunities in life. And so I became passionate about cities and placemaking, and I studied urban design because I wanted to have a role in creating cities and public spaces. And while urban design is really important for that, I found the particular tasks that I was working on were documenting concrete specifications and other very detailed work, which wasn't so exciting to me. And I was more interested in the human side of cities. And so I had the opportunity after that to work with the United Nations in Southeast Asia on a lot of projects involving informal settlements, upgrading and or resettlement. And that taught me a lot around participatory design and the bottom-up planning and placemaking, I guess, and really the inspiration that comes from working with communities that are completely self-made in many regards, which is what we find in slums and informal settlements. So there's many, many challenges around infrastructure and poverty. And when I came back to Australia, I was inspired to think about how we could adopt some of those more collaborative bottom-up processes for city making in an Australian context. And that's what led me to get inspired by placemaking as a collaborative process for shaping cities. I started a consultancy here with some colleagues called Co-Design Studio, which is really looking at community-led and bottom-up placemaking, and did that for a while. But I'm now working in data analytics, which might seem like a very different approach, but what I've found over the past 10 years, whether it's with large consulting or United Nations or small-scale placemaking consultancy, we're all facing a similar challenge that we're all trying to create places for people, but that's really hard to do if we don't have any data about the people. Like, you would never expect a traffic engineer to create a traffic plan without any transport data, but yet we often expect placemakers and urban designers to create places for people without a really thorough understanding of the community context. And so we created Neighborlytics, which is a platform that harnesses big data to measure urban life and urban life we describe as the activity that goes on within and between buildings. So not so much the physical building itself, but all of the other social and cultural activity that goes on. And so my interest in now is in how we, I guess, evaluate and measure and quantify some of the benefits of place by using data analytics.
Great. Yes, I read about that and I was blown away that how technology can help us too. Yes, and we'll come back to it again. Okay, I wanted to ask you about the idea of porch placemaking and how did it come to you and what was the experience overall, because this is how I came to know about you.
Yeah, sure. And we hope to do porch placemaking again this year if we can.
Great.
Look, porch placemaking was essentially an idea that we came up with one weekend and then organized this campaign in just 3 weeks. It was a sort of short idea, and it was during the first lockdown in Australia. It was in April this time last year, April last year. When all of the world was locking down for the first time because of COVID, and suddenly we found ourselves that the public spaces that we used to interact with were sometimes closed or less accessible, and we were spending, all of us, a lot more time at home. And so we started to think about, well, what if we could inspire our neighbours to build social connection from a distance through really small scale projects at home. Now, that could be a porch, which is, I guess, one context, but we used porch as an umbrella term to really refer to any kind of private space. It could be a balcony, a street outside your house. Some people did projects in stairwells within apartment buildings. And so we went out to the Global Placemaking Network and asked if they would be interested to get on board and join in asking and being involved in participating in Porch Placemaking Week. And we were really overwhelmed. Like I said, the whole event was organized in 3 weeks and we had like 230 projects and 30 different partner organizations, and so much interest at that time in people really, I think, wanting to get involved and do something that helps to connect with neighbours during that very difficult time of lockdown, which we've subsequently been in and out of for the last year.
Yes, and I have seen the pictures and stuff like that, and it was very incredible, and it inspired hope towards people and towards the social connection. It was an amazing idea.
Yeah, and I hope that we can do it again, because something that's really nice about Porch Placemaking Week is that the projects are so simple and so small that anyone can get involved. There were community centres in Nairobi who were doing planting tree projects, and there were apartment blocks who there's another lady in an apartment block who grew sunflower seeds and gave them to her neighbours to plant on their balconies. So they're really just small scale activities that shows, I guess, the heart of placemaking.
Yeah. Okay, so tell me, how do you support placemaking approaches for planning and designing cities while challenging traditional approaches?
That's a big question, and there's not an easy answer there. There's probably not one approach, but I am fascinated and passionate about that question, about how do we actually shift these very rigid planning processes to provide greater benefit for communities. And our experience with Co-Design Studio was using tactical urbanism and other experiments in order to drive that change at first. But perhaps it's worth talking a little bit about the way that we did that. Because one of the challenges, and this is in the Australian context, that we had around placemaking 5 or 6 years ago, is that many of the projects that are now common, such as parklets or outdoor dining or pop-up spaces, were incredibly difficult to deliver. And because they were often prohibited by the local government, They required very expensive permits. They required insurances that community organisations and small businesses definitely couldn't afford. And the red tape and the process that went around trying to do these projects was extraordinarily hard. And it meant that even though there was great passion and ideas and energy that came from the neighbourhood and the business community, they were essentially blocked by a lot of local government authorities in trying to execute their idea because they couldn't get permits or insurance or traffic plans and things like that. And so our approach to really spearhead a movement to overcome that was to run a program called the Neighborhood Project, which was a collaborative project that brought local government and community groups together to collaborate on tactical urbanism projects. And the purpose of bringing them together was to take a critical look at the risk and red tape approach that those governments took, and it was to take a look at the capacity of the communities to lead those projects, and for everyone to have a shared understanding of how they worked and what could be done. And it was an incredibly effective model because we found that council members were sitting down with community groups and thinking about these projects, understanding them differently and thinking about them differently. And equally, we spent quite a lot of work building the capacity of community leaders to enact that change. Because a lot of, I think one of the barriers, even though council has a lot of red tape in place, communities also have barriers that sometimes they want to lead but perhaps don't have capacity to, or they don't have the practical know-how to develop and deliver a project. And so by strengthening both those groups, we were able to come up with really creative projects that also had the benefit of helping reduce the red tape from council and building community capacity. And I share that program as an example because it really laid the groundwork for what's happening now during COVID. So across a 3-year period, we worked with 8 governments and a range of different community groups on these models of supporting community leaders and supporting councils to think differently about placemaking. And because that groundwork has existed, it means that now, during COVID, when there has been enormous funding for placemaking and outdoor dining as a means of helping people spend more time outside, helping businesses stay open and have their dining area outside rather than inside, all of that process has been much, much easier now because the groundwork was done before. So I think COVID is a big catalyst to help us change the way that we do placemaking, but it was important that we had some years actually of groundwork that took place beforehand to make it easier for those governments to take a real leadership role in COVID, at least in the Australian context.
Yes, I have noted this point because it's going to help me as well. Okay, so share some key points briefly on how social media is shaping our cities.
Yeah, so I guess one of the things that Neighbourlytics looks at is a whole range of different digital data that talks about our experience with a neighbourhood. So some of that is public social media, but it's mostly what we call place or location data that talks about business and community activity. We bring all of that together to measure urban life. That's a really interesting lens because what we have now, in the past, we've just had our physical environment, and our physical environment is very complex, and it has a social environment too. But what we have now that we didn't have before is a digital community as well. And so that relationship between place and digital is merging in lots of ways. They're no longer separate spheres. And so we've particularly seen this, this has again been accelerated because of COVID, because we've had to rely on technology more for everything rather than just occasionally dipping in and out. We've had to rely on to go to the library or access government services or meet with friends or to work. It's all been almost entirely online. And so we have these digital communities as well as our physical communities. And what's interesting about that is that we can start to look at that digital layer to help us understand what's actually going on in neighbourhoods. So to me, it's less about social media necessarily changing the place itself, but it changes our relationship with place, where there is such thing as Instagrammable places. Like there are famous places that people just go to put on Instagram and they become very popular. At the same time, we might we want to highlight the things that we value and connect with most about our neighborhood by photographing them or rating and reviewing them. And so we have this way of evaluating our places by using the digital world, which is a different way of thinking about place, because I think in the future that's only going to become larger. So we should pay attention.
Yes, and this is what you do at Neighborlytics, right?
Yeah, so at Neighbourlytics, we tap into that rich digital data that's been created every day to look at the context of how a place works and what its urban life is, and then use that information to help to optimize planning and design decisions.
Right. Okay, so you tweeted once that the pandemic is changing not just how we live, but where we live. What is your vision for future now?
Yeah, and I would love to hear also about what you experience in Lahore and in other places as well. But certainly, what the data is showing us and what my observations are in Australian cities is that the COVID has really been a shift on people moving out of the CBD and into the neighbourhoods. So because of lockdowns and work from home, we have seen like a relocalization or a hyperlocalism, with the suburbs and neighbourhoods becoming much busier and more active and the CBDs being very vacant. And in the data, we've seen there's a 60 to 70% increase in the volume of digital data in the suburbs and a 20 to 30% decrease in the volume of data in CBD areas. So one of the things that's really important about that in terms of the future of cities is that the local neighbourhood, or the rise of the neighbourhood, is becoming a very, very important unit economics for our city. That perhaps in the past it was okay for people to move around a lot. Now we're seeing that 20-minute neighbourhood, or what you have access to within walking distance, is an incredibly important building block for our cities. And so we need to think about how we invest in local amenity that you have available to you within walking distance, and not just sort of in a CBD area. So that's one big trend that I think worldwide we're seeing, is that people are spending more time locally. But the other thing is that because we can now work from anywhere, what I think we will see post-COVID, as the world starts to open up, is that people are going to live where they choose to live, not in proximity to their work. And so in the past, it's been really important to be physically proximate to work, but now not so much. And so I think that there will be a much greater shift into where people choose to live, which is a challenge for cities. Cities are going to have to be really great, creative, interesting destinations in order to attract the best talent.
Yes, I'll think about it more in depth, and we'll get in touch to discuss more about it again. Okay?
Yeah,
Okay,
great.
so I want to ask you that share your journey and lessons as an influencing woman in the professional world, as you have been recognized as AFR Woman of Influence. Great, I highly appreciate that. Share some wisdom from
Thank you.
finance and business world.
Some advice from the finance and business world,
Yeah,
did you say?
yeah,
Um, Specifically around women-led leadership, or
yeah.
yeah. Yeah, that's another big topic, but I think we have a long way to go in terms of thinking about our cities through the lens of gender equality as well. And I guess there's maybe two comments to make about that. The first around the role of gender in planning and design and making cities more inclusive for women. And perhaps the second is like a personal journey of what it feels like to face barriers as a woman in leadership. But I think something that we don't think about or talk about enough is that men and women experience cities very differently. There are very many different considerations that women and women identifying people will make around safety, around what times of day they will go out, the types of activities that they will get involved with. And the problem is that historically, most urban design decisions have been made by men, often not necessarily understanding or considering the needs of women, which are different. Transit planning, public space planning, all of these things can be viewed through a gender lens. And that's highlighted everywhere. Like, I live in Melbourne, which has a reputation of being one of the world's most livable cities, but 1/3 of women in Melbourne do not feel safe in public space. 1/3, like, that's huge, and that's in a city that's meant to be very livable. So there's lots of ways that we can start to think about that, including having more women involved in decision making and making sure that we pay attention to gender balance in the way that we engage with communities. And something that I've learned from international development, and the work of United Nations and World Bank and others, is that there is often gender as a cross-cutting lens across every decision. So we need to look at our placemaking project and ask the question, is this decision going to benefit women or not? And so there's lots of considerations to make there. And lots of great organisations working on that issue as well, but something we can all do more on. In terms of business and advice and strategy, I think I have stories like most women would have of being underestimated, or people not taking me seriously, or needing to do extra effort all the time to be heard and listened to. And sometimes that's frustrating, but on the whole, I do feel that there is a lot of progress being made around amplifying female voices. One of the bigger challenges I think I've had is moving into tech. So Neighborlytics is a technology company, it's a data analytics company, and the perceived and real gender barriers for women in tech, in my experience, are much greater than women in property or women in placemaking. And I think there is more perhaps bias around what women can do in technology compared to the advances made in some other fields. And yeah, all kinds of things that people have said, just assuming, people are often surprised that it's my business or my co-founder's business. They're like, is it your company? Like, yes, but why are you surprised? Like, why do you assume that it couldn't be? And I think that my experience is just being underestimated or not having the assumption of trust by others is tiring. Like, I feel like I spend a lot of my day proving that I need to be heard before I actually say what I need to say. And I think lots of women do that, and it's really, really tiring. And I think that happens in placemaking as well. But one thing I am excited about is I think that the agenda and dialogue, and there are so many women leaders in placemaking, which helps to amplify that voice. I think placemaking as a collaborative practice and approach is something that really helps women to lead. A lot of community leaders are women who are stepping up and doing incredible advocacy and change work in their neighbourhoods. And overall, I think there is a lot of dialogue and a lot of progress being made. And placemakers probably have a lot of lessons to share with other professions about how they can help amplify the role of women.
Yeah, and it is paving the way for the upcoming generation and the girls that are interested in contributing towards their cities and towards the world. Okay, so let's move on to the wrap-up questions, the rapid questions. Okay, Lucinda, what drives you? What keeps you focused on public spaces?
What drives me? I'm a firm believer that the world can be better in the future than it is today. I'm optimistic, and I get up in the morning because I believe that I have a role to play in that you have a role to play in that my team has a role to play in that. And so I'm motivated by progress and the potential that we all have a role to play. And it might sound very altruistic, making the world better, but I think that public spaces and, placemaking more broadly, are the heartbeat of cities. And so when we get them right, we get so many other things right.
Yeah. Thank you for playing your role so well. I'm very inspired by that. Okay, so share your proudest moment of your work life.
Proudest moment of my work life. Wow. That's a great question to ask. There's lots of different moments. So if I can maybe share more than one. I mean,
Yeah, sure.
Recently, in the last year, I am actually most proud of our team who, like many, really had a hard time during COVID and who were incredibly resilient and pulled through that so strong. That was just, I feel incredibly proud of that. I also, a moment I think feeling really excited is a few different times, both with Neighborlytics and with co-design, we had significant funders who were prepared to back our vision. So whether it was with investment or large grants, and that made me feel incredibly proud that there were people out there who were excited about this vision for the world and who were prepared to put their money on the table to support it. That was incredibly validating, and I hope to continue to be able to pay it forward with others and in the future fund their projects too.
Yeah, that keeps us motivated and optimistic as well. Okay, share
Yeah.
your hardest moment of work life.
The hardest moment of work life. I think one of the challenges, I mean, apart from the fact that it's lots of work all the time and managing your energy and getting tired is hard. But I think one of the challenges of anyone who's in leadership is that you have to be able to grow yourself faster than you're growing your team and your company. And I have not always done that as fast enough, you know. And so it's been a challenge to being able to deal with some of these really difficult things that you face either on projects or with customers or with government, or there's many different challenges that you'll face, and having the personal resilience to deal with that means a lot of investment needed in growing your own leadership and self. And that's something that I'm very focused on, but it's also there are different times when I haven't been able to grow fast enough, I think, and have found different moments really
Yeah,
difficult.
I can totally relate to that because I'm facing that myself. So, okay, do you have any your placemaking mantra that keeps you on track, like a North Star?
Yeah, a North Star. Um, I like to think of, um, I guess I think about it in terms of fixing problems. So it's less of a mantra. I mean, I think great places are shaped by people, period. Like
Okay. Yeah.
always. And so more people involved in placemaking is, being able to collaborate with people in placemaking is particularly important. I think from a neighborlytics perspective, our kind of mantra is, if you can't measure it, you can't manage it, which is, a very old quote from Peter Drucker. But I do actually see that as a bit of a North Star in terms of placemaking and planning, because the things that we can quantify and visualize are the things that we can more easily fund and invest in and prove. And so the more that we can quantify the intangible values of place that we all know about, in our experience we know about them, if we can quantify them, helps us make better decisions. So if you can't measure it, you can't manage it is something that certainly motivates us at Neighborlytics.
Okay, great. Do you have any opinion about placemaking in Pakistan or any advice would you like to give?
I admit that I am perhaps less familiar with placemaking in Pakistan, so I'm not sure that I'm authorized to give advice. But I would really like to learn. I think some of the most inspiring projects and places that I have been to and learned from are from unusual places. I take great inspiration from a lot of projects that I've visited and seen in Nairobi. Similarly, projects I had the opportunity to work on in Cambodia. I've seen incredible innovation, and I'm sure that there is incredible innovation in Lahore and other parts of Pakistan, and I would love to learn more about that and collaborate with you on those.
Yeah, looking forward to it. Okay, lastly, any message for the global leaders out there as many young professionals are joining in?
Yeah, I think the thing I think is about public spaces and planning, especially from a young professional's perspective, is that there's a very big, diverse range of professional opportunities within this field, and it's easy to think that whether you're an urban planner or you're this, that maybe you're on a fixed path. There are so many different roles that you can take part in. You can be a community leader, you can be a data scientist, you can be a government official, you can be a property developer, you can, like, there's such a wide spectrum. And I always would certainly encourage particularly young professionals or graduates in this field to think really broadly about what they're interested in and how they want to create impact.
Great. Thank you so much, Lucinda, for your time. It was such a valuable conversation. I love talking to you, and I'm looking forward to work with you in future as well. Take care.
Thanks so much.
Have a great day.
Thank you very much. It's great to be here.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.